Catherine Connolly, so previously in your political career, you've stood for the council, you've stood for the Dáil. Everybody says that running for the Áras is the most bruising, the most bitter campaign of all. How have you found it so far?
The feedback on the ground has been absolutely brilliant. The hardest part for me was making the decision, and it took a good few months for me to make that decision. Once I made it, I think I had an overwhelming sense of pride, and that feeling has been matched by the feedback on the ground. And I've been out every single day, I think, without fail, every single day in different parts of the country. So I've been up to Bonnyconlon Agricultural Show in North Mayo. I've gone to the Ballyshannon Agricultural Show. I've been to Achill. I've been to Westport. I've been to Wicklow. I've been to the Fla in Wexford and so on. I won't list out all, but every single day I've been somewhere. And I can say without hesitation that the feedback has been excellent. I would call it a soft canvas, going out meeting the people, and it's been wonderful.
Yeah. So much of the talk before the campaign was about how there was a need for a left unity candidate. So you have Labour on side, you have the Social Democrats, you have People Before Profit. So far we're still waiting on Sinn Féin to make their minds up. I mean, what's your view on whether or not they should back your campaign? Obviously, you'd like them to do that.
I certainly would like them, but I have said in every interview, I respect the process. I mean, Labour had a similar process. The Social Democrats had a process, and People Before Profit. So every party has their own process. And Sinn Féin were clear from the start that they would go through that process and make their decision towards the end of August, September. So I respect that. I would like to think of myself as a unifying candidate, drawn from both sides of the House and across the country. And I think that was very evident when I became Lasceann Comhairle. I wasn't expecting that victory. I was motivated by standing. If somebody else in the opposition parties had stood, I would have backed them, because I think it's very important to give competition. And when it was clear to me back in 2020 that nobody was standing for the Lasceann Comhairle and we were going to hand it as a gift, I thought that was wrong, and I stood and I galvanised support across both sides of the House.
Do you feel you have unity on the left? I mean, there have been some voices in the Labour Party, Fergus Finlay perhaps most prominent amongst them, other voices as well who say they're concerned, that they're not happy that the party rode in behind you. I mean, does it get at you that there are people chipping away on Labour about they say that they have concerns about your views on Ukraine, for example, or on Syria, or that you've now had a good word to say about the party over the years? I mean, are you the unity party of the left or a unity candidate of the left?
I would like to think I am. I leave the Labour Party to sort out their own comments. You know, the Labour Party have the majority have endorsed me, and I welcome that. And I'll certainly work. I was out with Ivana Bacik today, and we walked through Trinity and walked downtown, and we met people. Deputy Sherlock was with me earlier on. So I welcome their support, and I welcome the work from the Social Democrats and all the other parties that have come out. And I await Sinn Féin and see what decision they make.
If they do put someone forward, if Mary Lou McDonald, for example, does stand forward, I mean, there has been anxiety among some of your supporters that if they do feel their own candidate, particularly someone of the magnitude as the party leader, that it would be curtains then for your campaign.
I wouldn't think so. I wouldn't think so. I think if Sinn Féin stand a candidate, so be it. One of the reasons I declared early was I'm an independent with a particular background and a particular history, which I might get a chance to come back to. And that has empowered me and enabled me to make the decision, albeit it took some time. But I feel Michael D has been a very courageous president. And I welcome the number of occasions that he's spoken out, and indeed his wife, in relation to the need for peace for the Ukraine. And he's been very, very courageous on Palestine. And equally, I have great respect for Mary Robinson and Mary McAleese, and all in their own way have expanded the role of president, albeit within the Constitution and within the law. And I would see myself as continuing that tradition and using the role of presidency to the best of my ability. And I have there are not many articles in the Constitution that set out the role of the president, but one of them, Article 12.8, talks about the president taking a solemn vow to serve the welfare of the people. And that sits very well with me, that whoever is successful, and I hope it's me, that I'll be taking a solemn vow to serve the welfare of the people. I think Michael D has done that to the best he can, and the other two presidents, and I will continue to do that. Within that, there is scope to shape my own presidency.
Okay. One of the things you've been asked about a couple of times on the canvas trail so far has been Ireland's role in the world, its friends and its allies around the world. You said you spoke with concern about our relationship with the United Kingdom, with the United States, with France, for example.
Yeah.
I mean, if those are people, countries and groupings to be concerned about, who do you see Ireland's allies in the world as being?
You see, I think those comments were made in context in the Dáil when I was talking about a particular topic. And I think Ireland has a particular history. We've been colonised for hundreds of years. We've also had a terrible famine. And that history gives us a new, unique perspective on the world. And I think we have to use our voice for peace. And the Constitution obliges us to resolve in a peaceful manner conflicts. And I think we have to use our voice in a proactive manner. I think we're very trusted across the world because we're a neutral country. We have served in the United Nations repeatedly since 1955. And we're all very proud of our defence forces that have served abroad. So that's the voice that I will use. We have nothing to be gained by joining big powers and everything to lose, because we need to speak truth to power, whether that's the Russian invasion of the Ukraine, which was totally wrong, or whether it's Israel and Palestine, or wherever. We need to be able to speak truth to power. And we can only do that if we maintain our credibility as a neutral state, but proactively in using our voice.
And how would you see your role as president in doing that? I mean, would you do anything different from how Michael D has been doing things in terms of speaking out on issues of concern around the world?
Yeah, I wouldn't like to compare and contrast, because I don't think that's appropriate, really.
I mean, you're going to have to do it over the course of the campaign. Everybody's going to have to sort
No,
of
absolutely, but I think Michael D has served the country proudly. He's one of the most popular presidents, if not the most popular president, and rightly so. He has shown courage repeatedly when it was necessary. My own background has shaped me, and in one of the early interviews I did, I think it was a podcast with Sean O'Rourke, and I've reflected on that, and I said there was no politics in my family. And actually, I meant there were no politicians in my family, but we lived and breathed politics in the sense of social justice from a very early age. I come from a large family, 7 boys and 7 girls, and a father who instilled in us a sense of justice. And it was only on reflection and talking to my siblings that I realised that I should really expand on that, say there was no politics in the house, because there was in the best sense of the word. And then I went forward and became a clinical psychologist, and I worked for approximately 7 years in a community care setting in Ballinasloe, which was revolutionary at the time, because I wasn't in a child guidance unit, I wasn't in a psychiatric hospital. I chose to be in a health centre on a multidisciplinary team, and that was in the 80s. That shaped me. I went on from there then to do the LLB, and I must say it happened organically. Quite a lot of the positions I've had in life have happened organically. And I think it's come from the shaping of me in my house with my father and obviously my mother, who died at an early age, had a profound effect on us. We learned about equality, the absence of equality. We learned to recognise hypocrisy from a mile away. And we learned how different policies of the local authority were contradictory and so on. And I've spoken about that before. So then I went off, while I was a psychologist, I started to study the LLB in Galway, and that led on organically to, I left the health board then, and I left a permanent pensionable job, which my boyfriend at the time subsequently became my husband. He absolutely paled when he heard it. But I made that decision and I'm proud of it. And then I took a number of jobs while I was studying law to finance myself. Okay. And so then I became a barrister. I worked for over 20 years as a barrister. And parallel with that, I was a counsellor for 17 years. So all of that experience has shaped me into a person who realises that one has to be able to listen as a president. One has to be able to lead. And I suppose when I'm asked why I want to be president, or if people ask me that, I'd put it a slightly different way and say, I think there are essential characteristics for the president of this country: listening, compassion, care, courage, and leadership. And if I look at my background and what shaped me, I believe I have those characteristics. But I let the people of Ireland decide. Okay. I let them decide whether they see those characteristics in me and whether they value those characteristics in the way that I do.
Have you made any mistakes along the way? What would the biggest mistake be in your political career, do you think?
I've made lots of mistakes in a sense, like any human being. I think my greatest strength, I've never described myself as a natural politician.
Okay, but I was asking about your greatest mistake, though.
Well, I'm trying to get to that, you see.
Okay.
People would look at that. I think I never learned how to play a game. My strength was in actually speaking out, having done my research, speaking out bluntly on a topic and saying what I feel and what I think, and always putting solutions forward. Some people would see that as a failure.
Yeah. Do you regret anything you said? I mean, I think people, some of the criticism and some of the interview questions that you faced so far have been about associations you have, I suppose, or people who might support your campaign. I noticed there the other day, Mick Wallace was there saying that there's an orientation of Nazism in Ukraine. Obviously now you have separated yourself from him in terms of saying that you support Ukraine in terms of defending itself against the invasion. But I mean, that sort of talk, I mean, would you lie yourself in that thinking?
I think Mick Wallace and Claire Daly did a great job in the Dáil. I think they did tremendous work on holding the Garda management to account, and they did many, many other good things. And this thing of by association to be guilty is a very, very worrying way to go. I'm standing as a candidate for the presidency based on my record, based on my integrity, and I let the people decide in relation to that. I have never hesitated in my comments on the Ukraine, never. What I have pointed out is the hypocrisy of the way this government and other governments have dealt with Israel, not with the same blunt language. And every time at different debates, and I think I took part in most of them, sometimes you might have a minute, sometimes you might have 5 minutes, I would do the same amount of research. And what I noticed is the language in condemning Russia, and rightly so in condemning Russia, was absolutely clear, crystal clear. It was never crystal clear in relation to Palestine. And in that sense, we lacked credibility, although we're the best country in the class, as it were, for our rhetoric and speaking out. And certainly the positive decisions have been made by the government. So the point I'm making is, when we zone in on one thing, we ignore the bigger picture. And we have to ask, what is our role? What is our role in the world? What is it we want to do with our unique history and our the famine and our unique background? What is it? And as a bilingual country, you know, Irish is our official language.
Just on the point, obviously, about, and I think a lot of people would agree with you in terms of the view that Ireland hasn't been, or the West in particular, hasn't been as strong in terms of its response to what's happening in Gaza as it had been with what's happening in Ukraine, or even elsewhere around the world as well. But if you were elected president, it's very likely Donald Trump would have to come here and visit. He has obviously been, and the United States has been, the key weapon supplier for Israel. Other European countries have done the same as well over the years as well. How would you handle a visit by Donald Trump? I mean, everybody says, and you hear the government say it repeatedly as well, that we're going to go in there, we need to use every opportunity to speak truth to power. But how would you do things differently from how you'd say Micheál Martin would do in the Oval Office?
But this is a false distinction. There's a role as president, and as president you greet and meet dignitaries of state.
And you have no problem doing that?
I've had the privilege of doing that as Lascan Corla. I met President Joe Biden. I wasn't particularly happy with his history in relation to Palestine and Israel. And I shook his hand and I met him. I also met Frau van der Leyen. Okay, I shook her hand and I did my duty as Lascan Corla. And I've done that with numerous visits to the Dáil as Lascan Corla. So I think I've shown I'm quite capable of doing that. I had forgotten that the Ceann Corla was out for a particular period. I utterly forgot that. And I just assumed the role of Ceann Corla full-time. Even though I was Lascan Corla, I assumed the full-time role. I was there for every single debate, all of the votes. And I think I've shown myself to be a very hard worker, fair, just, and it was a very good experience when I got used to it as Lascan Corla to be able to sit and listen to other viewpoints from across the House. And I realized, I always did because I'm a Democrat to my fingertips, but the actual practice of it in the Dáil was a very helpful experience for me as Lascan Corla.
So you wouldn't have any objections then if Donald Trump rocked up to Áras and Neutrality and you were standing there to greet him?
If I have to do that as president, that's part of the role.
Why do you think there's some people, I mean, Michael Healy-Rae said in describing you, I think she's anti-American, God almighty, do you ever listen to what she says and the speeches she'd made? Anti-American, anti-Trump, anti-everything. If the sun was shining in the morning, she wouldn't be happy about it. That's his view, he said. I mean, why is there such a level of fear in some quarters of what a presidency led by you would be about? I mean, why do you think there is that pushback?
I don't know where that fear is, because the feedback from the ground is absolutely positive. And they're actually outlining why they want me, because I have courage and because I'm not afraid to speak out and say what I feel based on research, not just feelings, not just giving quick retorts. I was never a person to give a quick retort on social media. Indeed, I made a very conscious decision not to do that. I didn't want to give a false impression. I have to think, I have to reflect, I have to read. So going back to Michael Healy-Rae, I let him account for himself and why he has chosen to support a Fine Gael candidate. But I leave that entirely up to himself. We have the closest connection with America. My own family were over in America. Similarly with England, similarly with Germany. 3 of my siblings spent a very long time in Germany. And so these questions come up about being anti-Trump. But can you imagine we're dependent on Trump for a peace initiative between Russia and the Ukraine, the man that's totally behind Israel in a genocide. That's how volatile and, I won't use the word crazy, but that's
what does that say about Ireland and Europe's place in the world? I mean, we're very meek. We're very much not even at the table when it comes to any of these initiatives, are we?
Well, I think the Tánaiste and Taoiseach think they've been very good in relation to it. And on a certain level they have. However, we still have planes going through Shannon, American soldiers. We're still trading with Israel through Europe. Nothing has happened in relation to the trade agreement, which was the first thing that should have been suspended. Then we haven't passed the Occupied Territories Bill, which is on the go, and Senator Black and the tremendous work she has done since 2018 and beforehand. And we still haven't passed that bill. And I hear discussions. I'm not sure if I'd call them discussions, but I hear comments about we have to think of the consequences. And there's no discussion on the consequences of genocide. So there are certainly consequences in relation to trade. But what about the consequences of genocide that we're tolerating on our watch? And if Israel gets away with this and America, what are the consequences for the future, for our world? So when we're looking at America, we have to distinguish between its people on the ground and our close connection with them and our reliance on them for trade. And similarly with England and Europe, we have to distinguish between people and what governments are doing.
On the subject of genocide and war crimes, obviously the question of the visit to Syria has come up multiple times now. Now, you've had obviously ample opportunity since the Irish Independent interview to think about that. You were pressed on, could you remember the names of the people you had met there and who organised the trip in the first place as well? Have you dug up the name in terms of the group that was... I
gave as much information as I could. We went over to Syria, actually. The group I was with was a group of community activists who had long been active for the Palestinian cause, well before the trip in 2018. I was accompanied by 3 TDs. Mick Wallace, Claire Daly, Maureen O'Sullivan and myself. Significantly, over the last number of years, as Syria came up repeatedly, Maureen O'Sullivan was never mentioned because it didn't suit the narrative. That in itself is worrying. And I've discussed it. Maureen was with me earlier today, walking around with me and actually doing a promotion for me as to why. And significantly, her name was never mentioned going back. It's been mentioned now because I've mentioned it with her permission, but it didn't suit the narrative to put Maureen in.
Whose narrative do you think that is? Do you think that's a campaign to try and discredit?
Well, certainly I will answer the question in relation to Syria as often as I can, but I'd really love to be discussing why I'm standing, what my vision is for the country, what people see in me and where we're going. So for the record again, I joined that, and that delegation or that group of people had already gone. They flew into Beirut prior to us. They visited refugee camps, Palestinian. That was the sole purpose. And then I joined them in Beirut, but we were too late to see that. And we went to Damascus on a bus. And the first place we went to was the Palestinian refugee camp, Yarmouk. And it was a frightening experience. It was utterly destroyed. We were led around by Palestinians whose heart was broken. And as I've said, I went with this naive opinion that it was a camp with tents. It was a city. Almost 200,000 people lived in that. And we saw utter destruction by the Assad regime. and also by others as well.
Yeah.
And the Palestinians got caught in the crossfire. They didn't want to take sides. So we had the Free Syrian Army, we had ISIS or ISIL, and we had Assad's regime. And the Palestinians were caught in that.
As they always are, yeah.
And we went to the Salesian nuns. We met with a Sister Bridget Doody. I've given all these names.
I know, yeah, but do you feel that you might have been used, even unknowingly, for propaganda purposes? In photos of that being used?
I actually jumped at the chance of going, and I'm delighted I went. It was a fact-finding mission. I came back with a horror of the Assad regime and what they'd done. I had that horror before I went. I came back with a horror of war and destruction. And most of all, my admiration for the Palestinians and their resilience as refugees. Ironically, they were treated better initially in Syria than other countries, which was ironic given the dictatorial regime. But they certainly got caught and massacred. Okay, so I wish I had had the opportunity to go to other countries, but I became Las Cancorla in 2020, and my life was full. I made one trip in those 4.5 years, and that was because I had no choice. And I went to the Isle of Man in the place of the Cancorla. So what I'm saying is I wish I had an opportunity to go to Sudan, Ethiopia, that we're not talking about at all. I wish I had, I didn't, and I did that. That's what I did, and I learned from it.
Obviously, there's been so much focus on who else will be standing against you in this election. You've been talking about your vision for the future, about how you'd like to see Ireland represented, be a voice in the world when there's other voices, whether it's the US or the EU, calling for all these different things. Bertie Ahern is a name which has floated up multiple times now for Fianna Fáil, as well as Jim Gavin on the lesser side. But I mean, how would you counteract Bertie Ahern if you're out there canvassing and debating?
See, the wonderful thing about this election is the people elect us. So we're candidates in the election for the presidency, and the people of Ireland will decide. So I leave it up to Fianna Fáil what candidate they want to stand. I'm certainly very familiar with the tribunal and all of the tribunals and all of the other reports, because I have an ability to read, and it has stood to me in good stead since the day I went into the Dáil and prior to that on the council. I leave it to Fianna Fáil to decide. I must say, the delay in choosing a candidate by the bigger parties says a lot about their approach to a very important role protected by the Constitution, set out in the Constitution. So in that sense, the delay and the rhetoric around who will pick and a Lanigan's Ball type approach is disrespectful.
In terms of Sinn Féin as well, do you think that's disrespectful as well?
Well, you see, what happened with Fine Gael is they put somebody in, and then unfortunately that person had to go. Then the next person went in who said they weren't standing and so on. In relation to Fianna Fáil, they've been thrown out. Micheál Martin said he's not standing. And then, so in that sense, that continuous delay is not helpful. Sinn Féin from day one said they would make up their mind in September. They gave a clear message. They never said they would make it in August. Okay, so let's see.